I took the night job at Wrenwick because quiet suited me. After years of shift work in places that never slept, hospitals, station platforms, a warehouse where the lights hummed like tired teeth, I wanted corridors that forgot your name the moment you passed. A boarding school on a hill in Gloucestershire sounded right. Curfew at 10. Doors that had already learned how to be shut. Ancient stone that carried its own hush. By day, Wrenwick pretended to be a postcard. Ivy combed, gravel raked, brass polished, until even the headmaster's smile reflected back at him. By night, it remembered it was older than its manners. Air pooled in those passages. The chapel's iron latch liked to lift an inch and stop, as if stretching. The clocks kept to the right time and somehow not the right hour. I learned the sounds the place called ordinary. Pipes clearing their throats. Foxes with human screams on them. Radiators ticking off the last of their day heat. My patch was the main building. 2 dorm wings, the kitchens, the porter's lodge, and the east service road that ran out under yew trees to a pair of ornamental gates set into a crumbling perimeter wall. They called that run Old Service because once it had taken cards to a back courtyard that wasn't a courtyard anymore. Just nettles, a tumbled shed, and a blind corner of brick that kept the gold. The gates were iron, tall and over-decorated, with curls at the top that had rusted into something like thorns. A black padlock hung where it should hang. Outside, through a hole scorched smooth by years of use. I was meant to check it 4 times a night and write the same sentence in the log each round. East gate secure. My 3rd week in at 0214, the lock was on the wrong side. I stood there breathing frost and torching the bars as if light could behave like authority. Same padlock, same scrape along the shackle where someone had hammered 100 winters ago, but looped from inside, facing me. The metal felt wet when I reached through, not damp from fog, wet from somewhere that hadn't learned air. I wrote, secure. Anyway, I walked back up the yew alley listening to my boots. Say, you're here, you're here, you're here. I told myself I'd misremembered. The next night it was back on the outside. Night after that, inside again. A rhythm you don't want to notice began. I asked Duncan, the day porter, about it in the morning when the kettle was loud enough to make conversation small. Best leave Old Service alone, he said, staring into his mug like it showed weather. What reason? He spooned sugar without looking up. Before my time, I would have filed that with the other folklore. Thrown away keys, buried wells, the choir boy who never graduated. Except the CCTV began disagreeing with me. There's a grainy dome above the East Road. Mostly it draws moths. Around 0213 every night, it would pick up a shape beyond the gate. Nothing with edges, just the kind of density that makes darkness feel domesticated. It would pass behind the bars, pause like a thought, then go where the lens couldn't look. I went at 0210 the next night, because that's the kind of mistake you make when you think you're in charge. The yews leaned in as if a wind I wasn't in had breasted them. My torch laid a white coin down the lane. The gate waited like it knew who belonged to who. The lock was outside. I touched it, and it felt as if it had been in my pocket all day, warmed by a hand that wasn't mine. I listened. The night listened back. When 0213 clicked over on my watch, the lock twitched. It didn't jump or rattle. It rotated a fraction, like a head noticing. Then it slid through to the other side without the gate moving at all. the shackle past the metal as if the bars had remembered being ore and chose to be so again for a breath. I stepped back so fast my boot slid on wet moss. I could say the iron was cold when I gripped the bars to stop myself, but that's not right. The cold was under the surface, the way a bruise lives under a color. I stood there holding on to an old idea of a barrier, while the lock sat inside with its face toward me, satisfied. I didn't write that in the log. I wrote secure and quiet and M2 stairwell bulb flickering, and I went home at 6 and slept badly and dreamed the padlock had teeth. The school had ways of feeding you answers you didn't request. 2 nights later, I found an envelope in my pigeonhole. No seal, just my name in the headmaster's careful hand and the particular smell of office carpet. Inside, a typed note. Mr. Hale, please grant Director of Music Mr. Adair after-hours access to the chapel organ loft for emergency tuning this week. Additionally, refrain from opening the east gate for any reason until further notice. H.S. I could have ignored that second line. No one had asked me to open anything, but the way it sat there, refrain, suggested that someone had opened it before. That night, the lock performed its trick while I watched, and then something else happened. Something too small for a report and too big for a man. From beyond the gate, a sound rose. One note, not blown, not struck, as if the U's had a tuning fork humming in their ribs. The note wasn't a pitch I could sing. It was the taste of a pitch at the start of a nosebleed. All right, I said, and the air ended the word for me. On my way back, I cut through the cloister. Through the chapel door's iron grille, I saw light where there shouldn't be any. I have a key to everything that needs keys. I made shapes at the lock out of habit and stepped into a smell like dust, learning a new language. Up in the loft, I could just see Mr. Adair's profile, a gentleman cut from dark paper, moving among ranks of pipes. He was humming nothing. The sound that came back was something that had already been hummed before he thought of it. I closed the door quietly. I don't know why I wrote organ loft quiet in the log. Quiet is a word for the lack of noise, not for a presence you don't know how to scold. The nights collected. The lock continued. The camera caught that shadow shape the way a mouth catches a stone in bread. And at 02:14 the gate would be locked from inside, as if something had returned home before curfew and was careful about it. A week later, a pupil went missing for half an hour after prep. His name was Lister. Choir, 16. Hair neat in a way that irritated other boys. He never left campus. He never took a second biscuit. He had the polite hands of a person who thinks about where each finger is allowed to be. He vanished between the library and the dormitory and reappeared at his housemaster's door with mud on his trousers to the knee and no memory of how he got it there. He was brought to the medical wing as you bring a found thing to the place usually allowed to put it. I wrote a line in the incident book. Mr. Adair came and spoke to him very softly while the nurse took notes that didn't help. That night, the lock moved at 02:12. It never did that. It held to its minute like a bell. But when my watch blinked 02:12, the shackle slid, the metal accepted it, and I heard the same knot note under the trees. A fraction lower, as if a throat had warmed, before I could do the cowardly and sensible thing. Walk away, someone said from the road behind me. Ranger. They say all jobs are the same job in a different costume. I turned and it was Mr. Adair. He held his hands palm out, the way you do for skittish animals and men who want to be skittish. You shouldn't be here, he said gently. I work here. I said. Not here, he said, and looked at the lock the way you look at a child's mouth when you deciding whether to tell it to stop singing. We are keeping time. Who's we? The school, he said, and smiled. And all at once I could imagine him smiling at a boy who had failed to find the note and convincing the boy he had found it after all. The lock clicked again. Nothing made it do that, and tilted as if listening. I didn't step aside. Adair did. He stood as if he preferred to be between the gate and anything else. You'll write it up, he said kindly. You'll write secure because it is. You'll think otherwise. That's not your job. Your job is keys. The school's job is keeping. Keeping what? I asked. You can't keep nothing, he said. We keep what leaks. He left then, with the quiet that a man keeps about his feet when he's learned the floor's favorite jokes. I stared at the gate until my torch made it pretend to be ordinary again, and then I wrote secure and quiet, and went and stood in the chapel and listened. The organ didn't sound. The air did. It was the same not note as under the U's, dressed differently. When badness comes, it often chooses the time you've agreed it should not. At 0240, the dorm alarms shrieked, ran in a circle and tripped one another. Boys spilled into corridors with that crackling laughter fear wears at school. A duty master counted heads and reached a number that didn't agree with itself. Lister, someone said. We found him on the East Road, standing 20 feet from the gate, coatless. The frost had a color on his shoulders. He was not shivering. He was listening to something. Come on, lad, I said, voice slipping into a register I didn't know it remembered. Back we go. He did not look at me. His eyes were turned not toward the lock, but through it, to a strip of path that didn't exist anymore on our side. I touched his sleeve. It was warm the way a radiator is warm when it's done being useful. Did you open it? I asked. The gate's shut, he said, and his voice had that neatness school installs. Only from this side. Who told you that? He swallowed. The swallow had a hitch in it. His gaze flicked once toward the chapel, rinsed silver on the quad. Sir, he said, and the word was a held note, not an address. After, when the boys had been returned to their beds like punctuation, when the duty master had signed the sheet with the authority of a man who didn't know what he had seen, but must remain the man, I went back to the East Road and stood under the U's. The lock was inside. It looked correct. I waited until 03 for it to remember it was a trick and perform it again. It did not. The note in the trees waited with me and ended when I decided to stop hearing it. You'll think me a coward for not telling the head. You all think me complicit for not phoning the police or the council or the kind of authority that wears fluorescent jackets and has a van if I say I understood that what was being kept was a version of the school itself. You'll think I'm being poetic because I'm guilty. I didn't understand. I just knew the words available to me. Gate, lock, secure, quiet had been moved to new meanings, and that using the old ones would get me and Lister and perhaps even Adair into trouble with the place we all served. 3 nights later the gate opened. Not for me, for the air. At 0213, the padlock inside arranged itself into the shape of an unlocked padlock. The bars did not part so much as admit that they had always been farther apart by just enough. The U's leaned. The not note dropped down into a place under hearing, and something went through. No shape, no shadow, just a pressure change, like a large animal turning in another room whose door is not entirely closed. On the ground where nothing had walked, a footprint appeared. Not a boy's, not a man's. A faint, elongated, cloven outline like a parish tale would draw if it wanted attention. It sank a centimeter into the frost and steamed. I stood very still, because sudden movements are for predators and people who want to pretend there are none. The footprint pointed toward the school. Then it faded politely, as if it hadn't meant to be rude by existing. I made a decision. I reached through to the inside and shut the lock. It let me. The shackles slid. The metal remembered metal. The padlock sat outside again, obedient. The knot note narrowed to a thread, then unthreaded. My breath made clouds that looked like speech, with the words taken off. I said nothing, and the night congratulated me on my restraint. The next day there was a staff meeting about boundaries. The head spoke the way men speak when they have to say something they can afford to explain. He mentioned alumni. He mentioned traditions. He did not mention anything under trees. Adair watched me without watching me. In the afternoon, the chapel held choir rehearsal, and when the boys took their first note, it was 2 on pitch. It struck and rang true, and the stone accepted it with a small, satisfied noise. That evening I found a second note in my pigeonhole, unwritten and somehow read, "Refrain from interfering with East Gate movements." I could have left then. People leave jobs for less. An insult stapled to an instruction. A feeling in the bone that your name will get thinner if you keep saying it to the same walls. But Wrenwick had taught me the shape of my rounds. A person misses the shape of their walking more than they miss pay. I told myself I was staying to watch whatever it was out to the end, and that's how you sit down to a game with a thing that doesn't use cards. Lister came to see me 3 nights after near midnight, knocking on the lodge door with the soft knuckles of a boy, trained to have nothing he wanted. "Sir," he said. "Lister," I said, as if we were equals. "I can't sleep," he said. "I hear someone practicing under the ground." I said something sensible. He stood and held his hands very still, so as not to make them betray him. "It's the counting that's worst," he said. 3, 3, 3. It doesn't get to 4 unless I... He stopped. He looked at my torch on the desk. "Unless someone locks the 4. "What's the 4? I asked. "The 4 is us," he said, and his eyes let me know he'd already said too much and needed me to carry the portion that overflowed. "At 02:13, he added, as if we didn't both know. I walked him back to his dorm and stood in the corridor listening to the building rehearse its creaks, the way old ships must talk to men who live in them. When I stepped into the night to make the east round, the cold had a notice to it. It said, "Your permission has been altered. Some nights, if you're given an hour, you must use it all." I walked slow. I did not shine the torch until I saw the gate. The lock was where it liked to be now, inside, expectant. I didn't reach. I listened. A child singing far away. Then, not a child. Then not singing. Then a note that had been drawn very carefully inside a mouth and rolled along the teeth and let out with a civility that did not belong to the mouth. It was not the chapel's note. It was the absence under it. The lock rotated. The shackle eased. The gap appeared, not as metal pulled out of metal, but as time remembering itself. The space beyond the gate had the look of a place that existed even when not looked at. The yews made an aisle. I stepped forward and drew a line in the frost, with my heel along the inside of the bars. A second gate where none was asked for, because old stories are full of second circles, and I needed one that night. stare did not cross the line. It pressed it with interest. 3. Something said very politely. My own voice repeated back. 4, I said, and shut the lock again. And the word went into the metal and changed it. For a moment, the padlock didn't know whether it was inside or out. Then it chose outside, and I was allowed to breathe as if breathing were my idea. I went straight to the chapel. I unlocked it, closed it behind me, and stood in the aisle where the stone dips from a century of feet, and thought I could hear underneath, not pipes, not wind, counting, not out loud, not numbers, the shape of numbers. Adair was in the loft again, not moving, a dark punctuation mark against a dark sentence. "We don't need you tonight," he said, in a way that meant, "We need you to not be here." "You're counting," I said. "We keep 3, he said, the way a man gives you one of his names when he has others he will never hand over. 1 is the boy, 1 is the master, 1 is the one who listens. And 4, he did not answer. He looked at the altar, and the altar did not look back. "Stop," I said, and my voice cracked because it is difficult to speak authority to a place that confers it. "Stop opening what doesn't stay shut. Don't mistake us," he said kindly again, which was worse. "We close. We are always closing. That is our work. We close around what leaks. Without us, this hill would sing." He left me there with the organ as quiet and the stone as patience and my own foolish jest. At 02:13 precisely, the chapel bell, silent at night, rang once without ringing, the way a coin rings in your head before it strikes the floor. Under the floor, something agreed. The last night came the way last nights do, without telling you it is one until you say afterward that you knew. I made the rounds, wrote the numbers, let the doors take the keys and be grateful. I arrived at old service early and waited where the frost can see you. The lock was outside. The yews did not move. The air did not choose to be air. Lister was already there, on the path, coatless. His feet were bare, and you'd think that would be remarkable. But in the moment, it wasn't. He stood where my heel line had been a night ago. When he spoke, it was with the breath of someone who has practiced a song and can define the first word. "It needs 4, he said. "No," I said. "You can lock it," he said. "You can be the lock." He stepped toward the gate. I stepped with him and caught his sleeve and felt heat. He looked at me then, really looked, not like a pupil accused of something, not like a boy requesting permission. He looked like a person wanting to be put down somewhere safe and finding there are only corners. "Please," he said. "There are words that never do what you want. Please is one." I let him go 2 steps to make the 3rd matter. At the bars, he turned and put his hand through and touched the padlock. The shackle rose like an eyelid. From beyond, the knot note uncoiled and wrapped the metal. And when he turned it, the gate decided to be open. It didn't swing. It became a door that had always been a door. "Lister," I said, because names are chains when you use them properly. "Look at me." He did. He was there, fully present. Behind him, something that never had a face, had borrowed the shape of one from every face that had ever bent over a hymn book in that chapel. I could feel it in my molars, in the old fracture in my left wrist from a fall as a kid, in the place just under the ribs where embarrassment lives. 4, he said softly. 3, I answered, and I stepped into the space between the bars and him and the air, and took the lock out of his hand and shut it on my own wrist. The shackle closed through me. It did not cut. It accepted, For 1 second, the metal was a word, and I was the pronunciation of it. The knot note surged as if pleased, and the U's let a wind through that was not tonight. As Lister stumbled backward, as if pushed by a polite of course. He tripped over nothing and fell into the frost and breathed the ordinary air, as if it was something given to him for the first time. The thing on the other side pressed once against the bars, the way a cat presses against an owner, Seth's hand, when the door is shut, not angry, just sure of the arrangement. When it found the shackle lived through a wrist that moved when it moved, it paused. I felt it think. It was not clever. It was old. It had habits. It had been taught 3 and liked the number. 4 made it consider. It decided not to like being considered. The pressure withdrew by exactly the distance a refusal measures. The gate changed its mind about being open. The padlock accepted the outside. The metal warmed as if embarrassed. My wrist was unmarked. A band of gold hung there like jewelry I'd forgotten to take off. Lister sat up and began to cry. Not loud, not ashamed. The kind of crying that is a way of proving to yourself you have a body. Behind us, the chapel bell did not ring, and still we heard it. In the lodge, the phone did not ring, and still the head answered something. In the loft, Adair stood with his hand hovering over a rank of pipes, and said nothing. And the nothing was the kind that closes. "Come on," I said to Lister. "I dreamt you'd do that," he said. "I dreamt you wouldn't need me to," I said. We walked back under yews that were content to be trees. At the dormitory door, he turned and said, "Will it stop?" "No," I said, "but it will remember that we know how to count." He went in. I stood until the frost bit me properly, and then made the last round and wrote the last lies and the one truth. In the log I put East Gate Secure 0213. Then I added a sentence I'd never written. Temporary lock fitted. No one asked what it meant. That is the school's genius. It takes your truths and gives them uniforms. I kept the job through winter. I learned the clocks, moods, and the chapel as temper, and the way the yews whisper when there is no weather to blame. The lock still turned some nights. The knot note still visited under hearing. But when it reached for 4, it met a shape that reminded it of the first time someone shut a door and meant it. On my last night at Wrenwick, months later, Duncan handed me my leaving card and said, like a weather report, "You kept it shut." "I didn't," I said. I reminded it how. "Same thing," he said, "which is the kind of comfort old men know how to give. I drive past the hill sometimes and don't go up. That's how you keep your promises. If you take anything from this, take the counting. If something asks for 3, be the 4. If a gate insists it can lock from the wrong side, let it, and then show it the right side is yours to decide. And if you hear music from under the ground, don't sing with it, no matter how polite it sounds when it uses your voice to ask. Some places want your attention more than your presence. Give them one and keep the other. And when the frost draws a line for you, take your heel and draw another. I can't even tell you the exact trailhead without breaking what is left of the promise I made. But if you've ever driven west out of 10 sleep after midnight, you know the curve where the pines lean, as if they're listening. You know the way the cliffs suddenly show their cut edge in your headlights, like a bone. That's the road I was on when the dispatch crackled and gave me the coordinates. A fire report with no identified campers, smelling of cedar and hot sugar, seen between mile markers that shouldn't have had any light at all. I was the night ranger on duty for that side of the forest, which mostly meant noise complaints and flat tires, and the occasional cow standing in exactly the wrong place, wearing the wrong expression. I'd been hoping for nothing. Nothing lets you hear yourself. Nothing lets you think everything will stay like it is. The call came at 01:06. The woman was local, by the way, she said. The rim, like it was something the land was doing on purpose. She'd pulled into a turnout to watch the stars while her husband slept in the passenger seat. And there it was, down in the trees. A neat circle of flame in a place she swore had been snow-wet last week with no car, no tent, no shadows flitting the way people do when they forget if they're visible. It's not spreading, she said. It's like it's being polite. Her husband never woke up. She kept saying that. He never woke up. He sleeps like a boy. I shook him. He didn't wake up. I told dispatch I'd check it out. I swung the truck onto gravel and felt the tires talk back. Small stones pinging the undercarriage like a drum roll that couldn't decide whether to start. My thermos rattled in its clip. The red radio lamp glanced at my knuckles. The pines along Old Quarry Road had a way of reflecting light that made you think something was walking just off to the right of you, keeping pace without the decency to crunch. I've done this long enough to know the difference between a feeling and a fact. The fact, the wind was wrong. It came from the fingers of the draws instead of off the open. It tasted like a match you've just blown out. The turnout was empty. The sky had pulled its frost up to the shoulders of the hills. When the woman's taillights faded, the night folded around me like it had been waiting to do that, and thought better of it. Every sound got big. The cooling tick of the engine, the soft paper rustle of pine needles clattering against one another high up, where the old branches die and hang like ribs. I should have smelled smoke. If there was a live campfire, there should have been a body to it. Creosote, carbon, the ash part that goes in the mouth and sits there like a swallowed apology. I smelled something else, faint and false. Sugar, like spun candy left in the sun. I took my pack and radio, and the long mag light I still carry out of habit when the headlamp would do. The coordinates put the fire in a depression half a mile off the road, where the creek throws a tantrum in May and then sulks into hard-packed dirt by August. There are 3 ways down. I took the middle path because the left one has poison ivy that doesn't care if it is October, and the right one leads past a stump that looks exactly like a crouched man until you remember to stop expecting crouched men. When my boots left gravel for duff, the sound cut from glass to felt. The forest took the click out of everything. It does that when it wants you to pay attention. You know campfire light when you see it. It's warmer than a flashlight and more honest. It licks. It makes shadows that decide they were allowed to dance because they draw their permission from the center. I saw that glow through the trees about 200 yards in. A coin of it, too still. I stopped and listened, hand unconsciously finding the radio to keep it from speaking my presence out loud. I counted the night the way I always do. Creak noise like a whisper behind a curtain. Dead limb tapping something else dead. That far small clap that means a rock has decided to remember gravity. No voices, no careless laughter, no dry cough. I stepped into the clearing and saw the fire. It was textbook. A ring of stones newly blackened, each about the size of a skull if you were thinking in those shapes. A neat bed of coals pulsing like a heartbeat. 3 long pieces of cedar laid so precisely parallel that I knew a Boy Scout handbook had nothing to do with it. There were no chairs, no tent, no mugs with their teeth of tin catching in the light. The ground around it was clean of footprints. I don't mean nobody had walked there. I mean the place looked recently brushed, scuffed flat, in a way you can do with a pine bough if you don't. Do you want the morning to tell on the night? Whoever did it had done it well enough that you would know to know, unless you looked under where your eyes like to stop. I circled the ring once, slow. The heat had that friendly front room warmth to it, enough to take the bite off your shins, but not enough to push you back. I could hear the fire making its small decisions. This knot, yes. That resin bead, yes. This splinter, not yet. I crouched and held my palm over it. Warm. No. Hot. Someone had laid it within the last hour. Anyone out there? I called without wanting to call. The way you have to tell the rules to the dark, just to see which parts it understands. Nothing came back. Not even my own voice. The clearing ate sound like something practicing a trick. I should have kicked the ring apart, doused it, written a citation to nobody, and taken the note back to the road with me like a sensible piece of paper. That's the rule. You see a fire, you take it away from where it can become something else. But our fires don't start themselves. And in our section, where lightning rides the ridges and laughs, cedar doesn't lay itself in 3 parallel lines. I circled again, wider. That's when I saw the other thing, on the far side of the clearing, half screened by a young aspen that had a scar shaped like a fish. The ground had a darker patch. It looks like wet sometimes when it's not. It looks like shadow when the shadow's too well behaved. I stepped onto it and felt the give of disturbed dirt under a thin skin. Something had been buried there within the last day and smoothed over with a care that made me angry. A care like that is for graves. I radioed in, standard language, standard tone, responding to unattended campfire at coordinates. Will extinguish and investigate possible digging. The words made it sound small. It didn't feel small. When I clicked the radio off, the forest sighed in a way that had nothing to do with wind and everything to do with a long breath being let go after being held for too long. I went back to the ring. I've put out more fires than I can count, with a bottle of water and a boot heel. But a ring like that needs telling. Edges first, then the heart, then stir, till the steam comes up white and smells like old pennies. I poured from the canteen, and the water made that angry hiss I love because it means I won. The hiss poured it into sand. The cedar hissed once, reluctantly, and then went back to pretending it hadn't been touched. I stood there, arms still extended with the empty canteen, listening to a sound that wasn't happening. You have to choose, some nights, whether you're going to be an animal that runs or a job that stays. I set the canteen down like I was doing something ordinary and picked up the longest cedar stick and broke it across my knee. The sound of it cracking was too loud, and it woke something else up. I felt it first, not a cold, not a heat, a pressure, the way the night changes when a storm is walking toward you. Except there was no storm. The glow lifted, not brighter, but cleaner, like someone had taken a cloth to it. The air started smelling strongly of that spun sugar, that fairground falseness, and underneath it, a sour that meant fruit on the turn. I dropped the cedar and stepped back to the line of stones, because that was the edge that matters in old stories, and sometimes in new ones too. Okay, I said. Not to anyone. To myself, maybe. To the part of me that likes to explain things until they become small enough to put in a bag. Okay. The fire fluttered as if it had been complimented. Then, without throwing a single spark, it leaned toward me. Flames don't lean. They follow air. They don't decide. I felt the heat on my shins draw nearer by a foot without anything else changing. The coals brightened and settled themselves, like a cat needing a lap. I took another step back, and the glow followed that inch, like it had a leash. I wanted to leave. I also wanted to know. I settled for doing the one thing I could argue later was on the list. I drew a line with my heel in the dirt just outside the ring of stones, all the way around, a circle outside their circle, and listened to myself breathing like I'd stolen the breath from somebody else and had to use it up before it went bad. When I completed the line, the fire's leaning stopped. It settled back into the ring like an obedient dog told to sit. Someone had built that line before. I could see where an older groove, half filled with needle litter, had been traced and retraced by other heels. The stones had moved a hair outward to accommodate it. The ground inside the ring felt dead in the way a prayer book feels dead if you don't believe in what it is supposed to make. There are two kinds of rangers where I work. The ones who believe stories keep people safe, and the ones who believe rules do. I've always been the latter. Maybe because stories in my family were a currency you never got full change from. My grandfather told me the kind that stuck to your hands. My mother told me none, which is another way of telling. I stood there and looked at a ring that had its own etiquette, and I did what the rule book says. Photograph, document, extinguish, notify. When I raised the camera, the fire dimmed. Not a lot. Enough to make the edges of the clearing deepen the way a room does when you pull one lamp S-chain. I took 2 shots. On the second, the shutter stalled for the smallest fraction of a second, as if something on the other end of the lens had been slow to cooperate. When I reviewed the photos on the tiny screen, the first showed what was in front of me. The second showed the ring a breath larger, and the 2 nearer stones nicked by heat in places I hadn't hit to seen. I don't delete things in the field. I put the camera away. I walked to the disturbed patch by the aspen scar. My boot sank an inch. The skin of the ground broke under the tread. I scraped at it with the heel, then with my gloved hand. When that wasn't enough, the soil was loose for 4 inches, and then it firmed. I found what I expected to find and wished I hadn't: foil, crinkled and stubborn. I dug it free. Inside, 3 twisted-off candy wrappers, the waxed kind that stick if you leave them in a hot pocket, a 4th torn, and a paper cone made from a strip of some old magazine. The cone still smelled sweet. My light found words on it: county fair, ribbon, funnel cake. The edges were brown, as if someone had held it over heat long enough to warm sugar without burning it. A small glass marble fell out and rolled to my boot. It was cloudy in the way you get when something clear has tried too hard to stay that way. Behind me, the fire made a soft cluck like a tongue coming off the roof of a mouth. You can stand in a night and know it's about to change. You can feel it choose the other path. I knew then. I put the marble in my pocket, evidence I told myself, and went back to the ring. I broke 3 rules in 10 seconds. I stepped inside my heel line. I kicked one of the stones aside. I drove the steel end of my mag light into the heart of the coals and lifted, exposing the under. Everything under the crust glowed like a city seen from the wrong altitude. In the red of it, for an instant, I saw a shape that wasn't a coal and wasn't a log, a curl, a ridged line, something that wanted to be read as a letter or a worm. I knocked it loose and it stuck to the end of the light and then slid off into the ring. and vanished as if the ash had been a mouth. The fire breathed. I felt it on my face. My head swam in the kind of dizziness that comes not from fear but from a smell too sweet and too constant. I stepped back to the line and the fire stayed where it was supposed to. I rotated the long cedar log with my boot, and something whispered. Not a voice. The sound of paper deciding against burning. I don't know when I first heard about the camp. Not the official sites up near the reservoir, or the little pull-ins along the service roads, but the old one. You don't hear about it. You know it the way. You know the 2 minutes you lost between stations, when you fell asleep on the train and woke up with your cheek cold from the window. It as the fire that can, to make up its mind, the one you go down to see, because you think you might be the person who explains it, and you come back with one less thing you want to say, and one more thing you can stop hearing. We call it the forgotten campfire because nothing about it introduces itself as new. It smells like a memory you didn't have. It lights things that were never fresh wood. It eats sugar. It waits. I waited with it. At 01:23, a breeze came up the draw and pushed at my back, like someone testing whether I'd moved. The fire didn't notice. At 01:41, an owl flew across the clearing without changing its wing beat. Its shadow crossed the ring and didn't break. At 01:58, a far engine turned on, and then, after a count of 30, turned off again, like a person who has decided not to leave after all. At 02:07, I heard a footstep. Not mine, not a deer. It had the weight of someone who knows they don't have to hurry. It came from the creek, from the stones that pretend they're just sitting there. I turned the beam of the mag light and pulled it back deliberately off the full, so the person walking in wouldn't feel assaulted by light. You manage people into telling the truth. You can't manage a thing like this, but you still try. The beam found a man in his 40s with a beard that had a single white thread through it, like a piece of fishing line he'd forgotten to take out. He wore a jacket from a hardware store with his name stitched on it in yellow, Lee. His hands were empty. His eyes did that thing eyes do when they meet a badge after the fact. They tried to be full of something acceptable and found that they couldn't. TB. He saw the ring, and then me, and then the ring again, and his mouth opened to say my name as if he had one ready. I didn't give it to him, so he said, Ranger, which is a way around the problem. Evening, I said. It's still there, he said, as if that proved something that had been under negotiation. You built it. He shook his head, but in the way people do when they mean yes with conditions. It builds itself if you lay it right, he said, and then he winced at his own words, like he hadn't meant to let them out. No, I came to see. You've been here before. It wasn't a question. He had the look people get when a place is a habit. The shoulders ease into it. The mouth gets tired of explaining its business. He nodded. You don't bring water to this one, he said. You bring something sweet. It eats that. He gestured vaguely towards the aspen with the scar. It likes cones. Who taught you that? I asked. He looked toward the creek, past me, as if someone had told him not to point where he wasn't supposed to. My brother, he said, when we were kids. He said it was a magic trick. Then he said it wasn't. Where is he now? In the ring, he said. And then quickly, not like that. He's not dead. He's just still there when it's lit. I've heard better lies. I've heard worse truths. The fire made a soft, appreciative sound. And for the first time since I arrived, it threw a spark. It leapt no higher than a moth and fell exactly back into place. Lee watched it like a man watching a stove he doesn't trust. He took something from his pocket. I tensed, the way you do when a stranger's hand moves near flame. But it was only a paper cone, the kind you twist from a strip. He held it over the ring. The sugar at its tip began to sweat, and then to brown, and then, just before it would have smoked, it vanished. The cone didn't blacken. It just grew lighter in his fingers. "You can feed it all night," he said. "That's not the mistake." "What is?" "Talking to it," he said softly. "It notices you. It keeps a bit." I felt the marble in my pocket like a second pulse. I thought about my photograph with the nick on the stones that wasn't there. I thought about the way the ring had leaned toward me when I broke the cedar. "You think it takes a piece of you?" "What, your voice?" He smiled without humor. "Your part in the story," he said. "The bit you own. The bit you tell yourself so you can go to the store and pick bread and remember your mother's number, which you don't to call and sleep. You feed it sugar so it doesn't take that. That's the deal. And if you let it get hungry," he stopped. "And if you talk to it?" I asked. He looked at me then. He really looked. "You already did," he said. "You said okay." The way he said it made the word echo in my head, like a dropped coin going down a well. Okay. I'd see at it as a shape to fill the air, a spacer between moments. I felt that little sucked out place where a word had been taken and weighed and found useful. "This is illegal," I said, "because sometimes you hold on to your own job like a rope. So ride me up," he said. "Use the right section. Unattended fire, unpermitted, open flame. I'll sign. I won't come back. Will that stop it?" I asked. "No," he said. "It doesn't stop anything. It just lets you pretend you help. I could turn him in. I could take his name and put it in the book and let the fine stack up in a system that only notices your shadow when you cast it on the wrong wall. I could break the ring and spend an hour and then another, and then go back to the truck and drink something bitter from the thermos and call it done. The fire watched us not with eyes, but with the composure of a thing that knows you are temporary, and it is patient. "Why do you come?" I asked. "My brother used to run away when we were small," he said, the words spilling like he'd stepped off something. He'd take the truck at night and come out here and sit and feed it and talk and feed it and not say a thing to me all day. He said it kept him from doing something else. He said if he gave it the sweet, it would leave the rest alone, and he could go home to his kids and not think about the river. He said if I ever needed it, I'd know. I didn't understand. Then, last year, he stopped and rubbed his thumb against the lip of the cone. Then I understood. "It helps for a while," he said, "and then it asks for what it thinks you promised." "What did you promise?" He lifted his eyes at last to mine. They had the dull shine of a stone pulled out of cold water. "To come back," he said. The fire brightened. It didn't hiss. It made that low-content sound that an animal will make if you happen to be one of the humans it allows. In the glow, I could see the ring in more detail, the way the inner edges of the stones had glassed over, the way a little sugar had crusted in a line like a shoreline. I imagined someone new, younger, dropping confetti of funnel cake sugar, laughing at the trick, missing something small later, and not remembering they'd ever owned it. "Don't talk to it," Lee said again, like a mantra you say to someone standing too close to a cliff. "Don't say anything you'd keep." "What if it talks to me?" I asked. He looked at the ring. "It will," he said. The fire, obligingly, popped. Not a log pop, a sound like a stuck tongue again. And then, very clearly, I heard my grandfather's voice. Not a word. The laugh he used to make when he took his hat off at the end of the day and set it on the peg. That small, pleased exhalation. That private joke he never shared. I think memory lives in the body like salt. Maybe this was a trick. Maybe my head had pulled a file out on its own. Maybe the sugar smell and the hour and the ring and the man with the stitched name had made me receptive. Or maybe the thing in the ring liked to polish the edges off a person and try them on. Okay, it said in my grandfather's laugh. I didn't run. I didn't sit. I did the only third thing. I stood and counted my breaths and tried to decide if this was the part of the night I got to take back with me and make smaller later, or if it was the part that would grow every time I thought about it until it sat across from me and ate when I ate. Write it up, Lee said softly, eyes on the ring, and tell them you put it out, and come back with water if you want to feel like you did something. Or don't come back at all. That's the only way it stays forgotten. Do you? I said. He smiled his bad smile. No, he said. He fed the ring another cone. The paper didn't blacken. The sugar didn't smoke. The cone grew lighter. He put the empty cone in his pocket with a care that made me want to sit on the ground and be tired. Then he stepped back exactly to the place my heel had traced and did not cross. He knew the etiquette. He had learned the line. I broke the ring then. I did it not gently and not violently. I kicked the stones in. I scraped the dirt over the coals until the red sulked into black. I poured the rest of my water, both bottles, and then I walked to the creek and filled them and poured again. And the third time, I heard the hiss at last, the satisfying sound of steam lifting, and the scent of cedar giving up. The sugar smell blew out, replaced by the mineral truth of cold water and rock. I stirred until mud came up, and the ring looked like a wound that had scabbed badly. When I finished, the clearing had the look of a room after a fight no one will admit to. Lee watched me without expression. He didn't help. He didn't stop me. It'll be back, he said when I'd finished. Not tonight, I said, knowing I was lying about something, but not sure which part. No, he said, not tonight. We stood there a while, two men with nothing to say to each other that wouldn't, to make one of us angrier at the wrong thing. Then he nodded once at my shoulder, like a man nods at a dog he doesn't want to encourage, and he walked back the way he had come through the creek, whisper, and into trees that did not feel like they had space for him. I watched his back until it was the dark's problem. Then I gathered the candy wrappers and the cone and the foil into a bag and put the marble in on top like a period. I made my report verbally on the way up, all clean words, all properly spelled. At the truck, I sat with my hands on the wheel and my forehead on the ridge of my fist until the radio crackled and said a name that wasn't T-mine, and I remembered that the world was keeping score, and I was supposed to be one of the people who read the numbers. In the morning, I filed the form. I attached the photos. I wrote the name on Lee S. jacket because that was the name he'd given me. I put the marble in my desk drawer and closed it. I told myself I'd take it to evidence after coffee. I told myself lots of things. That night I went home and my house smelled just a little like carnival. Not enough to accuse, enough to notice. I opened the window and told myself it was nothing to do with anything, that someone had burned the sugar on a stove 3 doors down, that it was sticking to me because I'd thought about it. I stood over the sink and washed my hands twice, and still, when I sat, I could feel a little grit at the back of the throat, the way you get when road dust decides it's part of you now, at 01:06, I heard the radio in my head crackle with a voice that wasn't on. At 01:23, the breeze in the alley pressed at my window screen and then drew back. At 01:41, I took the marble out of the drawer and set it on the table and stared at it until the white inside it looked like a moth's wing. At 01:58, I said okay out loud to the empty room, and I heard my grandfather laugh again from a place that wasn't his. I didn't go back the next night. I didn't the one after that. A week later, a different ranger called me at home to ask how the hell I'd put out a ring in the draw, because I'd had 3 reports in 2 nights of a light in the trees and a smell nobody could place. I told him water and persistence. He said he'd try. He asked if I had any advice other than that. I said, don't talk to it. He laughed because that's an insane thing to say to a grown man with a badge. Then he said he'd call me if anything was weird. Then he didn't. I saw Lee at the gas station 2 weeks after. He stood by the lottery tickets with his hands empty and his pockets obviously not. When he saw me, he had the look people get when a dream proves it's heavier than it looked. He came over. He didn't say my name. He said, it's hungry. He said, I tried not to. He said, I hear him when I turn the radio off. Your brother, I said. He nodded. He says, okay, he said, and his mouth smiled in that hat-peg way that wasn't his. He keeps saying, okay. I could arrest him then. I could pin a ticket to his jacket like a label on a jar, and look so hard at the rule I'd blur everything behind it into mercy. I didn't. I said the only thing that was left to say to a man who had already bargained with a thing that doesn't sign contracts. Don't go tonight, I said. I won't, he said, and he didn't look like a liar, which is worse. That evening, at dusk, I drove to 3 places that weren't the draw. I drove them wrong on purpose so my truck would smell like other roads. I stopped at the reservoir where the wind puts a chop on the water, like fish have decided to make little fists. I drank coffee that had sat on the burner too long and tasted like it would remember you. I put the marble in my pocket and took it out again. I told myself, you're not going. Then I went. The draw knew I was coming. The path felt flatter. The clearing felt tidier. The heel line had been remade. The stones stood back in their proper posture. The ring burned with a quiet that had authority. In the glow I saw on the far side a paper cone on the ground where someone had dropped it when they were startled. I saw a second beyond it, intact. The sugar in the intact one had turned glassy. That means it had been held over heat. That means someone had been standing there only minutes ago. Lee, I said, and regretted it instantly. The fire lifted like an ear. It said nothing for a beat, and then it said, okay, in his brother's voice, and then it said, okay, in my grandfather's laugh, and then it said, okay, in mine. I stepped back to the line and didn't cross it again. I took the marble out of my pocket and threw it into the ring, because people do foolish things when they want to prove something to themselves. It didn't vanish. It lay in the coals and grew brighter and then, weirdly, didn't melt. It turned white. It made my eyes water to look at it. I reached toward it, then pulled back, then reached again. The heat did its work on the hair of my knuckles. I didn't take it. It wasn't mine anymore, or it was too much mine. I did what I knew how to do. I fetched water until my shoulders ached and my boots were soft. I poured and stirred and poured. The fire hissed, and then it learned not to, which somehow felt worse. I broke the ring and the ring gathered itself. I kicked at the stone and the stone rolled back to where it had been set. I said nothing. I didn't say, okay. I said nothing until the sky went that raw pink. That means the sun is somewhere arguing with the horizon. And when I finally sat, because the body has a stricter policy than the head, the ring burned as small and neat as a candle on a table you can't reach. At 𝗏𝗧𝗢𝗥𝗬, I heard a truck on gravel. I stood. I made my face the one you make when you have to write a report that one to be believed and has to be. The truck stopped at the turnout and didn't come down. The day shift would handle something somewhere else, because the forest has a way of handing you problems in pairs. I scraped dirt over the coals until the shape of the ring could be read only by someone who already knew the alphabet. I walked to the road. I did my job. There's a procedure for closing a site that gets out of hand. We post, we patrol, we block with boulders. We pretend boulders are harder to move than people. I filed what I could, the least magical version that still warned. Unattended fire at mile marker X, possible repeat. Advise extra passes. The marble stayed white in my desk. When I held it up to the light, tiny bubbles showed inside like the throat of a bird. I stopped holding it up to the light. You want an ending? I know you do. You want the ring gone and the brother found and the voice put back in the right mouth. You want me to tell you that if you don't walk down the draw, it can't smell you. If you don't say okay to the night doesn't get to keep the word. I want that too. Here is what I can give you, and it is the truth I'm allowed to say, without feeding it. There is a campfire in a forest I still love, and some nights it is there and some nights it isn't. And the nights it is exactly as polite as the last person who fed it. And it will take from you not the thing you think is most precious, because then you would notice, but the little hinge your days swing on. Your laugh, your okay, your memory for the song your mother hummed when she wanted you to sleep. Something small enough that you'll go on for a while before you realize it. It's what the rest of you was built around. If you bring it sugar, it will leave the hinge alone for a time. If you talk to it, it will talk back in a voice you love. And then that voice will be lighter when you hear it somewhere else, like it's spent. I still make my rounds. I still tell people to drown it, stir it, drown it again. I still carry the big light because it makes me feel like the beam draws a boundary the dark respects. When I pass that turnout, I don't look down. Sometimes I smell candy shells, and sometimes I smell river stones, and sometimes I smell nothing. And I think that is worse, because nothing is what you call a room after you've moved the furniture out, and the impressions are still in the carpet. If you ever find yourself on that road after midnight, with a person sleeping beside you who refuses to wake when you shake them, and if you see a coin of light where there shouldn't be one, keep driving. Let the forest have the night. Let the fire keep its manners. Don't say a word you'd like to hear again. And if you can help yourself, if you walk down under the leaning pines, and the cliff that looks like a bone, and the sky that is too crowded to be kind, draw the second circle with your heel and stand outside it. Feed it nothing, talk to no one. You'll think the silence is rude. It isn't. It's the only thing the fire doesn't know how to eat. It didn't come. The water disappeared like I'd